Good morning, students. I hope this finds you well and safe. In our last lecture, we were talking about the 9/11 attacks and how the world totally changed as a result of those. Global terrorism has become very much a part of life, and it's not a phenomenon in the U.S. alone or Israel alone. It's a phenomenon throughout Europe and many parts of our world. Well, as a result of the attacks on the World Trade Center, the U.S. will initially declare war on Afghanistan because it was the country that appeared to be backing Osama bin Laden, the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. And it was controlled by a group called the Taliban. Now, they espoused a very strict brand of Islam, very suppressive of their people, very, very suppressive of women. And they came out of the chaos of the Soviet Afghan War. And so, as the United States begins the longest war in U.S. history with Afghanistan, they are fighting us many times with weapons we provided to them during the Soviet War. But the Taliban were very, very brutal fighters indeed. Now, going into Afghanistan, many nations supported the United States because they realized we had been exemptive tax. And so they were willing to support that. But at the same time, the leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, was bragging and boasting and claiming to have weapons of mass destruction and nuclear weapons that he was going to unleash. And so President Bush established a second branch of this war, and we invaded Iraq. Now, this time, Saddam Hussein bragged that it would be the mother of all wars. President Bush entered into what was called shock and awe, bombing raids, cruise missiles, and so on. And Iraq, once again, was quickly brought to its knees. The Iraqi people will capture Saddam Hussein in a hole in the ground, and they will actually try and execute him for crimes against humanity. So he was not executed by the United States, but by his own people. Now, something that was often not shown on television were things going on behind the scenes. U.S. soldiers playing soccer or basketball with Iraqi children. U.S. women teaching Iraqi women. Sometimes for the very first times in their lives, they were able to enter educational classes. The U.S. did a lot to rebuild the Iraqi infrastructure after the initial part of the war. And a lot of this never got on the news. And that's really, really sad. It was usually only the extreme things that very, very few American military personnel engaged in. I know some people that have served there. I have seen pictures. At one point, several children were playing. Some Americans were going through. A sniper started shooting, and the children took cover with the American soldiers because they knew the American soldiers would protect them. So we need to keep that in mind. We need to thank our military personnel for the overall great, great job they have done. Now, in 99, a new effort, even more radical than the Taliban, began to arise, and they literally wanted to rebuild an Islamic State. They were called ISIS. They were able to take portions of Syria that was engaged in a civil war and portions of Iraq, and these were some of the most brutal individuals ever. They would do mass killings publicly to try to terrify their enemies. In Syria, there was the ruins of a Roman town, some of the best preserved ruins in all the world, and they took bulldozers and bulldozed those to the ground because they had been built by what they called pagans. And so they will finally be defeated in 2019 with help again from the U.S. troops that were engaged in the Middle East. But as far as the war on terror goes, this will probably be an ongoing thing. Probably something that is going to continue, and we can just kind of go ... It's part of life today. Terrorists are real bold when they have the upper hand, when they have to fight militarily. They're not nearly as bold as they were. So, at best, terrorists are sadistic, brutal people at the very, very best. Now, bin Laden will actually be killed in 2011. By the way, as Arabs danced in the street with 9/11, Americans danced in the street with bin Laden's death. And so it should have been. And so the U.S. still has some troops in the Middle East. We are still in the process of trying to negotiate with the Taliban and maybe bring an end to the Afghan war, but still, these continue to be a part of American policy today. The last combat troops, technically, will leave Iraq, but still we have advisors, troops, and sadly, from time to time, American soldiers still pay the ultimate price because of what is going on in that very, very uncertain region. Now, as we think about it, the UN was established after World War II. It was to replace the League of Nations. Its main job is to maintain international peace and security. They have had some successes. Of course, they have had some failures. Like any organization, it is far from perfect. But it is probably better than nothing in that the world's nations can come together and discuss things. So, as we think about our modern world today, women have gained more economic, political, social, and sexual rights in the highly industrialized states. It is still not a full equality with men, but it is improving. The third most powerful person in the United States today, President being number one, Vice President being number two, Speaker of the House being number three, is a woman, Nancy Pelosi. And so here is a woman who has obtained a good position. We now have women who are in command of Air Force fighter batteries. And these are women who have earned this position, not just women that were appointed something to satisfy the clamoring crowds by any means. These are women who earned their rank and their position by engaging in combat themselves. But equal pay for equal work, something that we're, even in this country, still having to work on. Many of you are probably thinking, will there ever be a time when we have a woman president in the United States? Now, I would say yes. Don't know when that might be. We are told in the current election that Mr. Biden, who is probably going to be the Democratic nominee, it plans to name a woman to be his vice presidential candidate. We'll see what comes of that, for sure. Now, in many countries, women still have very, very few rights. You know, we talked about human trafficking and so on in the last lecture. And this is still a problem in our world today. It is a horrific problem. It is worse than slavery. And it is a problem that a modern world needs to and should be able to correct. And so we hope that as time goes on, that situation will greatly improve. Well, let's talk about migration. Issue in the United States right now. Highly, highly debated. People are sitting in Mexico wanting to try to get into the United States for the advantages that it has. Young women from Russia were flying in and having babies in the United States, hoping that because their babies were declared American citizens, they could have an opportunity to come to the United States themselves and live and stay. And so there are issues with migration that still must be faced and still must be answered. Now, a lot of the migration in the second half of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century has been refugees fleeing war. Syria has a huge, huge refugee crisis going on right now. Thousands of people living in impoverished camps, in tents, with very, very, very few means of keeping themselves alive. And all of this because of war. There's a lot of migration that goes on in some of the more unstable African states where you've got militias and militaries fighting one another. When aid is sent in, instead of that aid being able to reach the people that really, really need it, the aid is generally grabbed up by one of these military groups, and the folks that actually need it never have it. Now imagine this scenario, and this is a true scenario. A mother has 2 children. She has no idea what has happened to her husband. She is being forced to flee her village and travel about 100 miles. Both children are already malnourished. There's no food for the journey. And along the way, she will have to make a decision which of those 2 children she is going to leave behind. That is a decision no one should ever be required to make. And yet, in some of the circumstances in which unfortunates find themselves in Africa, those are decisions that are being made way, way, way too often. And so the world has got a long way to go. We're still, in many respects, just as brutal and just as nasty as we have ever been. Well, let's think about some closing thoughts. The 2000 census, and we're hearing take your census this year. The 2000 census showed that in the U.S., family matters were in a disarray. Every fourth child was living in a one-parent home. 1 out of 4 babies was born to a single mom. Blacks had an 8-time higher chance of being in prison, and the U.S. had more people in prison than either China or Russia. Gang violence was increasing, and yet with all of that going on, 60% of Americans said religion played a very important role in their life. While this is going on in the U.S., Europe, following World War I and its disillusionment there, following World War II and its greater disillusionment there, Europe has continued to become more secular. While we're thinking about this, the 2000 census also showed that Americans were becoming more tolerant to other lifestyles, and this attitude has continued. By 2013, the Supreme Court overruled the Defense of Marriage Act that President Clinton had signed, and this opened the door for same-sex marriages in the United States. And as some of you may well be familiar with, it generally takes 2 family members to be able to support a family in the U.S. today. Inflation, costs, and so on. Just to give you an idea, the first new automobile my wife and I bought together was in 1976, and brand new, that car cost $3,600. The first home that we owned only cost $19,000. When we first married, we were paying 19.9 cents per gallon of gas. So yes, prices have gone up, and they are continuing to go up. And so it requires more and more. Well, let's think about some other things. In 2013, Pope Francis becomes the first Latin American Pope. Now, this was a staggering event because most of your popes have been Italian, quite a few French, we've had a Polish Pope, but for the first time, a Latin American Pope. And Catholicism is very strong still today in the Latin American countries. It may be having chinks put in its armor in Europe, but not so much in Latin America. Now, the Catholic Church is having a scandal and it is an ongoing one. It is one that apparently has been going on for a long, long time, and that is the sexual abuse of young people. More and more folks are speaking out against this. There have been lawsuits. It has been found that there have been cover-ups, and this is something that is probably still going to continue to play out. Well, as we look at Protestant Christianity, the liberal Protestant groups are declining. The evangelical groups are tending to hold their own, and some of them even grow. But we find that young people, especially, are more and more turning from religion. And of course, they give a variety of reasons why they are doing this. And in the United States, one of the fastest growing groups religiously is the unchurched. Now, these are not atheists. These are just people who do not wish to be affiliated with a particular religious group for whatever reason they may choose to give. And so religion is in a flux as far as things go. And of course, to me, it is so shocking about the situations in Europe, considering the fact that they fought wars of religion, and now religion has become such a trivial matter in so many places in Europe. And of course, as we have seen throughout the entirety of this course, religion has always been a very fundamental and important matter in just about every place we have covered. Well, let's take a look as we conclude with the United States. And I want to give you 10 problems that exist in our nation today that, quite honestly, these are problems that we must confront. We must find positive solutions to. And they're not necessarily in any particular order of this one is more important than that one. They're all important. And I say all of this because you are going to be voting, and you will have a say in how many of these problems are confronted. And so it's important that you know what they are. Number one, mass shootings and gang violence. Now, the United States doesn't have an exclusive on this. But when I was in elementary school, when I was in high school, I never had a thought that someone might come into that school and start indiscriminately shooting at people. And yet, sadly, all too often, way too often, that happens in the schools across our nation. I would have never dreamed of a time when there would be metal detectors, only one-way visitors could enter a school. You have to go in and sign in, give your driver's license, and things of this nature to be able to see your family members in school. But that's where we have come, or should I say, descended. And we can do better than that. Also, we have tremendous gang violence. Now, we can say Chicago is the hotbed of this, and yes, it is, but there are gang-related shootings in Chattanooga. So it's not a northern problem, It's not a problem that is exclusive to some part of the country. And a lot of times, young people join gangs because they feel hopeless and they find acceptance there. And so we've got to do a better job of being able to give youth something to hope for and a sense of purpose much, much greater than that of a gang. Then we have the use of illegal drugs and, of course, an opioid crisis. So we've got a nation full of drug addicts. And, of course, a lot of drugs are being filtered in across a very porous border between us and Mexico. A lot of drugs coming out of Central America as well as Europe. And these are destroying lives everywhere. People are dying as a result of these things. And again, many times it may be because people feel hopeless. So we have to find ways to give people hope so they can find better ways to be able to cope in life. We still have poverty in the United States. There are still people who are barely making it. And of course, with this current crisis and some of these hourly wage job individuals losing their jobs, these people are even in greater desperation right now. People can't pay their rents. People can't put food on the table. The news is full of programs and blurps about the fact that people are going to food banks who never dreamed they would do so. And so again, what do we do to train and help people be able to get jobs so they can help support their family? Number 4, many of our military individuals are coming back after multiple tours of duty, especially in the Middle East, and they are suffering with PTSD, they're suffering with depression, and sadly, the suicide rate among our veterans is staggering, and it's shameful. We need to do a much better job of counseling and trying to help these individuals readjust, get back into life, and go on and live very, very productive lives. And hand in hand with that is number 5, the alarming number of American veterans who are homeless, who are on the streets. I mean, it's sad when you watch the evening news and they show the funeral of a veteran from World War II, Korea, Vietnam. This person has no family there whatsoever because they've been living on the streets in a city far from where they grew up. And the only people that show up are veterans and maybe concerned citizens who are trying to show their compassion for the individual. And again, these are problems that we've got to do something about. The VA has got to be improved. It's sad that it takes months for a veteran to be able to get an appointment in one of these clinics and hospitals. Perhaps we need to go to vouchers so veterans are allowed to go to any doctor and be able to get treated for the various problems that they have. And these are issues, young people, that you're going to have to deal with. These are issues that are just as timely as today? Well, obviously, number 6 is national security. Our military is quite strong right now. It is well trained. It is well prepared. But that sadly is something that in the world in which we live, we're always going to have to be, so to speak, on the razor's edge. We live in a world full of hot spots. Technically, as we have already said, we're still in a state of war with North Korea, and there's not a whole lot to tell us right now what the future may be in our relationships with them, although our current president has tried to improve those relations some. China, Russia, again, these are nations that would love to surpass the United States. They would love to see the United States hurt. And if we ever take our guard down, like Pearl Harbor, like 9/11, we may get burned, and we may get burned tremendously as a result of it. Okay, a hotbed issue. Immigration. Been an issue in the United States almost since there was a United States. And of course, today the issue is, who are we going to let in? How many are we going to let in? And who are we not going to let in? And why are we not going to let them in? And these are issues, once again, that are today. They're not in the past. We haven't come up with a decent, comprehensive immigration plan in years. And it's going to be up to your generation to do something about that. Are we going to be compassionate? Are we going to close the doors? Are we going to hang a no vacancy sign on the United States? All of these things are issues that must be confronted by the people of this nation. Number 8, we've got political stalemate. Until this coronavirus hit, Congress was basically stuck. The two parties couldn't get along, they couldn't agree, they couldn't work together. If Congress, quite honestly, were a business, everyone up there would probably be fired because of incompetency. And so we have a political stalemate. The country is almost equally divided down the middle. And it has been this way for a number of years, and it has not improved. Now, just a point from history. When Ronald Reagan was president, of course, Reagan was toward the conservative side. Tip O'Neill, a Democrat, was head of the House of Representatives. They were political opposites. And yet they were able to sit down, work together, and do things that were good for the country. We need that spirit of cooperation in our politics today, where the two parties can sit down and it's not just simply what the party wants, but what is best for the American people. Still have problems, number 9, in race and gender relationships. Now, racism has not gone away. It's still alive and well throughout the world. Anti-Semitism, of all things, is on the rise in the 21st century, not just in Europe, but even in the United States. So we've got a long way to go. And people within the U.S. need to realize we've got to get along together. We've got to be able to work together to make this country what it needs to be, and for each of us to have the kind of lives that we can best achieve. And so we've got to learn to get along with people. And the best way to do that is not prejudge people, not throw everybody into one group and say all whoever are, because all whoever aren't. All Americans aren't the same. In fact, in my U.S. history class, I'll ask the question, what is an American? And I'll be honest, students, the only answer I can really give is an American is a citizen of the United States. There are over 330 million of us, and there are 330 million different Americans. So we can't say that all Americans are. And so we've really, really got to work on these issues and improve things in this country. And it's going to take wise, reasonable confronting these problems, not just knee-jerk type reactions. And then, of course, number 10, we've got international discord. There are nations in the world, some in the Middle East and other places, that would love nothing better than to see the collapse of the United States. Whatever it took, whatever the cost might be, oh, they would dearly, dearly love to see that. That would be the greatest goal and joy that they could experience right now. The Middle East has its own problems. The Sunni and Shia divide that we have talked about is alive and well. You have Iran and Saudi Arabia, two of the bigger powers there, and they are opposites in that divide. And so the Middle East is a powder keg. North Korea, it has been and probably will continue to be a huge question mark. China, Russia, competitors, nations that we cannot afford to turn our back upon, because they too would love nothing better than to see the United States stumble and fall, and one of them be able to step into the power vacuum. As we said in the last lecture, the Russian people like Putin because Putin is an autocrat, and he is trying to put Russia into the middle of international affairs and make Russia a major power player in the world once again. And so nations like that, we have to watch. Well, guess what, students? We finished our textbook. We've had a couple of interruptions. We didn't get to finish class as we had planned at the beginning of the semester, and again, I apologize to you, but this could not be helped. I hope it has not been too great an inconvenience for you, and I hope the lectures that I've been recording have been a benefit. I've tried to give you everything I would have given you were we in the classroom situation. Of course, obviously, we have missed out on the interaction between you and me, but hopefully still you have gained something that will help you as you continue your life and your goals. And students, I want to wish you the very, very best in your future. Again, let me say something I've said before. Don't let anyone steal your dream. You have a dream of getting a college education. Get it. You have a dream of bettering yourself. Do it. Don't let anybody tell you you can't. Go for it, young people. Go for it. And I wish you the very, very, very best for your future. For those of you who will be leaving us this year, I'll be honest, I love it when some of my former students stop by and say, hi, this is what's going on. It's really a great thing, so don't forget about us here at Chat State Kimball. Please don't. Let us know how things are going in your life and in your future. I will be getting your test up this week. I know we have another whole week of school and then the week of the exams. But once I put the final test up, you may take that at any time you wish to. If you wish to take it this week and get it over with, that'll be perfectly fine. I will get it graded. At least in this class, your grade book in eLearn will be correct because we didn't have to drop a test in this course like I did several of my other courses. But the grade book will be pretty correct. My grade book that I personally keep is definitely correct. The final test will be open book, open note. You have had to operate at a disadvantage this semester, and so that's kind of the least I can do for you as you finish up. Don't forget your papers are due this week, and again, students, I want to wish you the very, very best, and stay safe.